All right, let's get right into it. In 2024, a generation that most people had written off as being, too distracted, too online, they rose up. And they didn't just protest. They shook an entire nation to its very foundations. This is the incredible story of Kenya's Gen Z and the digital uprising that brought a government to its knees and really showed the world the power of a youthquake. We have lost all our fear. Just think about that. This one sentence from a protester on the streets of Nairobi, it captures the absolute spirit of this entire movement. It's a declaration that something fundamental had just snapped. So how did they get here? What pushes an entire generation to a point where fear is just off the table? Well, to understand the explosion, we first have to understand the promise that was broken. You see, this whole thing really starts with a story. A story that resonated with millions of young Kenyans. A story of hope and change that, in just 2 short years, would curdle into this profound sense of betrayal. That in 2022, William Ruto ran for president with this really powerful narrative. He called himself the ultimate hustler, a guy who used to sell chickens and who really got the struggles of ordinary people. He promised a bottom-up economic revolution that would lift everyone up. But fast forward to 2024, and that promise? It felt like a distant memory. Kenyans were getting crushed by a brutal cost of living crisis, and the government solutions seemed to be making everything so much worse. And I mean, the scale of the problem is it's staggering. 67% of Kenya's young people are unemployed. Now, that isn't just a number on a slide. That is millions of young people who did everything right. They went to school, they got an education, and then they walked out into a world with absolutely no future for them. They felt completely robbed of the life they were told they would have. So, what's with the sudden squeeze? Why was the government pushing so hard? Well, a big part of the answer lies in this number, a massive public debt of around $80 billion. To keep international lenders like the IMF happy and, pay the bills, the government was desperate for cash, and it decided the easiest place to find that cash was in the pockets of its own citizens. And that desperation, it led to one single government policy that would become the final straw, a policy so completely out of touch that it would end up igniting a nationwide firestorm. So what was it? What was that spark? It was something called the 2024 Finance Bill. And this was a piece of legislation that, for so many young Kenyans, it felt less like a policy and more like a punishment. And the thing that made this bill so explosive was just how personal these taxes were. I mean, this wasn't some abstract corporate tax that people don't really feel. No, this was a 16% tax on bread. New taxes on sanitary pads and diapers, on cooking oil, on the digital services that their whole gig economy relies on. For a generation that was already pushed to the absolute brink, this felt like an attack on their very survival. And that attack was met with a response that the government absolutely never saw coming. Because this wasn't a protest led by the usual politicians or old-school activists. This was something new, a decentralized, creative, and incredibly powerful uprising led by Kenya's Generation Z. You have to understand, this generation is just built different. They are digital natives who grew up with the internet in their hands. Their movement was leaderless, organized on platforms like TikTok and X. And crucially, it was united by shared economic pain, not the old divisive ethnic politics that had defined Kenya for decades. And they are not all the same. A UN-backed report actually shows how diverse this generation is. You've got the builders, who are young entrepreneurs, the survivalists, just trying to get by, and the traditionalists, educated but with no jobs, feeling completely betrayed. This movement managed to bring all these different groups together because they were all feeling the exact same pressure. So how on earth did they pull it off? Their strategy was pure digital genius. First, they educated. Activists jumped on TikTok and broke down the super dense legal language of the finance bill into short, viral videos in local languages, making it easy for everyone to understand. Then they mobilized, using hashtags on X to coordinate leaderless protests across the entire country, all at the same time. And finally, they supported each other, crowdfunding tens of thousands of dollars for medical aid and legal help. It was incredible. And this brilliant digital organization very quickly spilled out into the physical world, setting the stage for a dramatic and ultimately tragic confrontation between the people and the state. And the escalation was just terrifyingly fast. On June 18th, the first protest began. Just 2 days later, the first life was lost when police shot and killed a protester named Rux Masai. By June 25th, the anger had reached a boiling point, and thousands of protesters marched on and stormed the parliament building itself in Nairobi. But what's so important to remember is that by all accounts, these protests were overwhelmingly positive. Eyewitnesses described the demonstrators as creative, peaceful, and totally united. They were smartly dressed, carrying flags, dancing, and singing. They were there to demand a better future, not to burn things down. The state's response, however, was anything but peaceful. Security forces used tear gas, there were targeted abductions of online activists, and, tragically, they used live ammunition against unarmed civilians. It was a brutal crackdown designed for one thing: to instill fear. The human cost was devastating. By the time the crackdown was over in July, an estimated 65 protesters had been killed by police. 65 young people who went out to fight for their country and never, ever came home. And behind every single one of those numbers is a story. This quote is from Caroline, the mother of Erickson Mutisia, a young man killed on June 25th. He had told his coworkers he was going to the protest to fight for his country. His mother says he later came to her in a dream and told her, "Mom, I didn't regret it." It's just a heartbreaking testament to the conviction these young people had. The violence shocked Kenya and the world, and it pushed the country right to the edge. But out of that tragedy came a moment of victory and a whole new set of questions about what the future could possibly look like. Faced with overwhelming public pressure and a nation that was literally in turmoil, President Ruto blinked. In a televised address to the nation, he said he would not sign the bill. He conceded. It was an absolutely stunning win for a leaderless movement that was born on the internet. But after that initial celebration, a new question started to bubble up. Okay, they had won the battle against the bill, for sure. But had they won the war for their future? Was this fight really over? And the answer from the streets was a resounding no. The movement's goals have gotten so much bigger. It's not just about one bill anymore. Now they're demanding a total overhaul of what they see as a fundamentally corrupt political system, and they're calling for the president himself to resign. Which leaves us right here. Kenya's Gen Z proved they can mobilize, they proved they could challenge power, and they proved they could win. They found their collective voice in a way that literally no one thought was possible. The question that remains now, the one they're trying to answer on the streets and online, is can that powerful new voice now be used to rebuild a nation?